Okay, so today's daf is Pei Hey. We are on the second line of Pei Hey Amud Aleph. Let me share my screen and we will get started. So, um, yesterday we began the 10th chapter of Sanhedrin, which lists the sins for which one receives the death penalty of strangulation. The first of that list was hitting a parent. And so as we pick up on the second line of Pei Hey Amud Aleph, we're going to deal with an exception. We're going to begin with an exception to this rule, or a potential exception. So again, middle of the line, Bo mine Rav Sheshes. They asked Rav Sheshes, Ben Mahu shliach la'aviv. What is the rule if a son is made an agent regarding his father, lahakoto ulakalolo, in order to hit him or to curse him? And Rashi tells us, second line, end of the line in Rashi, Mahu shliach, based in. It doesn't mean that he's going to be an agent of the court. La'aviv, in connection with his father, whether his father is subject to excommunication, which is effectively a curse, malchus, or it's in connection with lashes. Both of those are that's how you get to the hitting and the cursing. And so, what's the story? Would a son be allowed to do that? So Amar Lahu, Rav Sheshes answered, "V'acher mihitiru." So when it comes to some third party who is now the agent of the court and hits somebody or curses somebody, what enables that to happen? If clearly what's going on is the honor of HaKadosh Baruch Hu enables, and the importance of that is going to override any prohibition against hitting or cursing another person. And so as a result, Hachinami Kavoda Hashemayim Adiv. So here too, the honor of Hashem will supersede the honor of one's father. And so as a result, the son is allowed to do so. So the Gemara is now going to ask two questions on Rav Sheshes. And the second question is going to be a tough question. We're going to have a couple of different answers until we find one that actually works. But the bottom line is we will resolve all the questions against Rav Sheshes. So Meisvik, question number one. Uma mim shemitzuve lahako. So we have this very cryptic brisa. It says that when it comes to somebody who's commanded to hit, mitzuve shelo lahako, so he's also commanded not to hit. Misha Eino Mitzuva Lahakoso, and one who's not commanded to hit, Eino Din Shemitzuva Shelo Lahakoso, he should certainly be commanded not to hit. Now, what in the world does that mean? So, my love, what's our original sense? Ediv Makom Mitzvah. There were both means that we're talking about a situation of a mitzvah, meaning that the person is the shliach based in. And Hai Bivno, the second case is when it's a son, meaning that even when you're a shliach mitzvah of a beis din, you're the shliach of a beis din, and you might say that there's a mitzvah, we say that there's no mitzvah. So haba acher, and the first case is when there is no, when it's a third party. And so the brisa would be read, so when it comes to a third party who is an agent of beis din, is allowed to, is actually commanded to hit the convict when the convict has been convicted of something that is subject to lashes or cursing. So mitzuva shelo lahako, so he's commanded not to do so outside the context of court. Misha eina mitzuva lahako, so when it comes to somebody who even in court is not allowed to is not commanded to do it, meaning even a son could not be a court agent. Eino din shemitzuva shelo lahako, so well then certainly outside of court he's not allowed to do so. So that would be the way that we would read it according to the question, and that would suggest that Rav Sheshes is wrong, because Rav Sheshes said that the son could engage in the hitting and the cursing if the son was an agent of the court. And now we're reading the brisa to say that you cannot. So no, not necessarily. As we pick up, we're now middle of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9th line down. So lo idi v'idi lo shna beno v'lo shna acher. Doesn't make a difference whether the person is a son or a third party. V'lo kasha, and it's not difficult to explain what this brisa, this cryptic brisa, actually means. So kan b'makom mitzvah, kan shelo b'makom mitzvah. One is in a situation where one is commanded to hit the person, meaning he's in court, and one is where you're not in court. So and we continue. And this is what the Bryce is teaching us. So that in a situation where you're commanded to hit somebody, such as an agent of a court, so you're commanded also not to hit the person, as Rashi says, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 lines down in the narrow lines on Pei Hey Amud Aleph. Mitzvah shelo la'akoso yoter me'arbaim. You're not allowed to hit more than the 40 lashes that you're supposed, actually 39, but we call it 40, 39 lashes that you're supposed to hit. And so as a result, the idea is the following. So shelo b'makom mitzvah she'ena mitzvah la'akoso. Well, then, back into the Gemara. Well, then, certainly, when you're not commanded to hit somebody, you should certainly not hit somebody at all. So then, the Brisa would read as following. So again, we're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 lines down in on Pei Hey Amud Aleph. And the idea is the following: that what we're saying is the question is. Again, Rav Shesha said that you're not allowed, that a son is allowed to serve as the agent of the court and curse or hit his parent, assuming that the parent is subject to the excommunication or lashes, and so you would be allowed to serve as that agent. Whereas we asked the question from a brisa that might be read to say that you're not allowed to do that. And we're going to read the brisa to say the following, that when you're a court agent, you're not allowed to hit more than the prescribed number of times. So certainly when you're not a court agent and there's no mitzvah for you to hit somebody, you're not allowed to hit the person at all. So that's what the brisa is saying. And so as a result, our first question against Rav Sheshes fails. And now we ask our second question against Rav Sheshes. And we are at Tashma, 1, 2, 3. So Ta is the last word on the line. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 lines down on Pei Hey Amud Aleph. So Tashma, Hayotze li hareg, uva v'nol v'hikahu v'kilolo chayiv. If somebody is being taken out to be killed as a court convict that is being killed through an execution, so and now his son, the convict son, comes and hits him or curses him, chayiv, the son is liable for doing so. So that means, at the moment, we assume that means that he's chayiv misa, that he's going to be subject to the death penalty. Again, cursing a parent is subject to stoning, and what we're talking about right now, hitting a parent, is subject to strangulation. But if some third party were to come and hit the person and curse him, patur, he seems to be exempt from any kind of punishment. And we asked about this question, Maishna beno, Maishna acher. What's the difference? Why should there be a difference? That what we're dealing with is a situation where the convict refuses to go out to the execution site. And so as a result, they're essentially forced to hit the guy. And nonetheless, according to Rav Chisda, according to this brisa, you're not allowed, the son is not allowed to do so. So how can Rav Sheshes say that a court agent is allowed to hit and curse his father when this brisa seems to be very clearly saying that you're not? So Rav Sheshes Mokila, so the answer is Rav Sheshes Mokila b'she'ein misarvin bo, let's say. No, first answer is that Rav Sheshes would say that the case is not where the officers have to try and force the convict out to the site of execution, but rather he's willing to go on his own, and yet the son still hits him or curses him anyway. Well, one second, if that's true, ihachi acher nami, well then, If somebody else were to do it, the other, a non-relative guard were to hit or curse the person, shouldn't that person still be punished? What's the explanation? So, after all, any other person's not allowed to hit. You're not allowed to hit anybody or curse anybody, period. So, acher gavra katilahu. For somebody else, the person is considered like a dead person. So there's no punishment for hitting him. 1 second, that's not necessarily true, because Rav Sheshes himself says, and right, he's the one who's making this statement that says that we're not allowed to, that the son is allowed to serve as the agent to hit or curse his parent. He says, Baisho Yashin V'meis Chayiv. If you embarrass somebody who's sleeping, you are still liable to pay compensation to that person's heirs for the embarrassment that you caused them, even though they were asleep when you caused the embarrassment, and according to Rashi, they never woke up because they were sleeping the whole time, and so as a result, they never learned about the embarrassment, and yet we say that you're still liable. So too, when it comes to this person who's effectively a dead man, we should say that just as in the case of embarrassment, we are going to create liability that lasts beyond the person's lifetime or continues even after the person dies. So too, with respect to hitting or cursing the person, we should say the same thing. So as a result, we cannot say our first approach. And so as a result, again, we have to go back and understand, how do we understand the brisa that a son is not allowed to hit or curse his father, the convict, when in this context, because after all, Rav Sheshes said you are allowed, the son is allowed to do so. So what's the difference between these cases? So Hakabamayas, here's what we're dealing with. The Shehiko Haka She'ein Ba Shav Pruta. No, we're dealing with a situation where everybody is doing a hit that does not cause a pruta of damage. And so as a result, when it comes to the third party, there's no lie. So again, we stick with the case where, unlike Rav Chisda, we stick with the case, as we said originally, that the officers did not need to force the convict out, and so now they have no justification for hitting. But the hit that the non-relative did was not worth a pruta, and so that's why he's not going to be liable at all. 1 second, though, that doesn't work, because Amar Rabbi Ami, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Hika, She'ein Ba Shava Pruta Loka. We have a remarkable statement that Rabbi Ami says, that in fact, if you hit somebody and you don't do damage that is worth a shava pruta, you get punished with lashes because you violated a negative commandment and you weren't obligated to pay any money. So if that's true, so then of course you're going to be the non-relative is going to be liable in this case. So why won't the non-relative be liable? So my pater dekamar pater mimamon. So all right, we'll clarify. When we say that the third party is exempt, we are not saying that he's exempt from everything. We're just saying that he's exempt from money. Well, 1 second, well, are you telling me that when you say chayiv with respect to the son, it means chayiv to pay money? But that's not true, because he caused a damage that was less than a shava pruta. So what kind of damages would there be to pay? So as a result, we need to go to our third potential answer. And again, the question is how can Rav Sheshes understand the this brisa, which says that a son is not allowed to hit his father who's a convict or curse his father who's a convict, when it seems to be talking about an agent of court, and whereas Rav Sheshes himself was said directly that a son is allowed to serve as the agent of court to hit or curse his father. Ella Bedino. So really, what we're talking about is each one's according to his law. So Hachinami Bedino. So when it comes to each one, we're talking about what is their relative law. So for the son, that means the death penalty. And for the third party, it means whatever liability exists for them, whether it's lashes or paying monetary damages. So ella acher hainu time at depater. So and so as a result, here's the reason that each one. I'm sorry. That is really in some ways part of the question. So the point is each one has to be about its area, and we're saying that the son is liable and the third party is not liable. So why is that the case? Why the difference? So ella acher. So rather, when it comes to a third party, hainu time at depater. Here's the reason that he's not liable. The amar kra v'nasiv amacha lo saor. We have a principle that when it comes to cursing, you're not allowed to curse a prince among your people. Now, this law of not cursing also applies to other situations, but we learn specifically from this verse of ba'amcha, the reference to among your people, ba'ose ma'ase amcha, that the only person that you're not allowed to curse is somebody who acts like he is part of your people, meaning that he's not a big sinner. So that works with respect to a curse. We can understand why there's no problem with the cursing for by the third party, because the person is subject to the death penalty. So clearly they are a sinner. So hakaminalan, how do I know that if you hit somebody who is a sinner, that you're also not liable? That we connect hitting to cursing. So there are two ways that Rashi offers as to how we might connect them. So it's the third line from the bottom narrow, from the third to last narrow line on Pei Hey Amud Aleph, at beginning of the line. Makshinan. Kolomar gamrinan b'mamatzinu. We can learn the law of one from the other based on the principle of mamatzinu, where we find a general rule in connection with one law, and we will apply that general rule to another category. And so the general rule is that you're not liable for when the victim is not doesn't behave properly, is not be'amcha, not considered among your people. And so as a result, we'll say that the same rule that applies by cursing also applies by striking. V'ikadamri, but Rashi continues, second to last narrow line. There are some who say that hekesha dekasiv, deksiv make aviv umakalel aviv gabi hadadi. That in Parshas Mishpatim a few weeks ago, we read about that you're not allowed to curse your parent and you're not allowed to hit your parent. And so as a result, that connection where those two psukim are very close to one another. There's only one pasuk between them, because one is in Parak Kaf Aleph pasuk Tesvav and one is Parak Kaf Aleph pasuk Yud Zayin. And so as a result, that proximity tells us that the laws associated with both of them should be similar. And so just as cursing a parent only applies where the parent is not a sinner, so too hitting a parent would only apply where the parent is not a sinner. And so as a result, now we understand, at least at the moment, why the third party will not be liable, because the person being taken out to be killed is in fact a sinner. Well, 1 second, ihachi beno nami. Well, now we just highlighted that in fact a son also is not liable for hitting and cursing if the father is a sinner. So how can the son be liable? So could the Amar of Pinchas, well, we can use an answer that Rav Pinchas offered elsewhere, where he said b'sha'asa tshuva, where the person performed tshuva. So hachinami b'sha'asa tshuva. So we could say here too that we're dealing with a situation where the person taken out for execution did tshuva. And so now you might ask, well, why is they taking out to be executed? Because of course, any kind of tshuva that a person doesn't get them out of the execution that the court convicted them of, but it still might get them out of the context of being no longer be'amecha. So as a result, maybe we should say that therefore that's why the son is going to be subject to liability for cursing or hitting his father. Well, one second, ihachi achernami. But then again, what about the third party? Why is the son different? Because in the end, the bottom line is that if the convict did tshuva, so why not have the third party be not liable? Why is the third party not liable? The third party should be just as liable as the son. So as a result, we answer Amar Rav Mari. Rav Mari offers the following: Ba'amcha b'mekuyim sheba'amcha. When we say that the cursing and hitting has to be on somebody that is in among your people, it needs to be somebody who's among your people who is going to survive. It's not if they're being taken out for execution, that doesn't work. Well, one second, ihachi benonami. Well, again, we keep going back and forth, and now our situation is the son also should be exempt because it's not be'amcha b'mekuyim sheba'amcha. So how come the son is going to be liable? So again, why this distinction? So as we turn to pay, hey, I'm a bet, the Gemara offers the final answer. Misa. That the point is that it's just like if it happened after death. So what does that mean? So Rashi really helps us understand what this means. Midi to have top Rashi on pay hey amid bet. Midi to have la'achar misa to yalfin and lekaman mikalel la'achar misa chayiv. That we're going to see shortly that one who curses a parent after the parent dies is still liable to skila and to the death penalty. V'im tomar, and so as a result, what do we say is the following: when it comes to a son, we're going to say that listen, if you hit him when he's quote unquote dead because he's subject to the death penalty, we're going to treat it just like cursing a father after he's died. And just like cursing a father after he's died, there is going to be liability. So to hitting the father when he's when he's being taken out to be killed, there will be liability. But when it comes to a third party, well, now we have this concept of mekuyim ba'amcha, that he needs to not only be a good person, but he needs to be a good person who's going to stay alive. And this person is as good as dead because he's been convicted and sentenced to death. Now, Rashi asks the question that you may be thinking. V'im tomer v'hatznan makel achar misa patur. Well, one second. We also know that, in fact, we're going to see that in just a few moments in the next Mishnah, we're going to see that if you hit a parent after the parent has died, you are not liable to the death penalty. And yet now, when a person is subject to execution and therefore we call him just like he's dead, we're saying you are chayiv, mechayiv lei. We're saying ahaka dikatani hako v'kolo, and because we said in the brisa that if you hit him or curse him. So hainu taima. Here's the reason to pater makela achar misa, that if you hit the parent after death, you're not going to be liable. Mishum de be'inin chabura. The reason that if you hit a parent after he dies, you're not subject to liability is because you need to create a wound. And once somebody dies, there is no sense of wounding any longer because the person's blood is no longer flowing. And so as a result, it's not really considered a wound. The lake of nefesh, there's no nefesh there. Denafka leila el mi nefesh v'yotzi lahareg. Excuse me, denafka leila el b'nefesh, that we learn that you need to have a chabura from the word nefesh, from the word soul, because it says maken nefesh. So v'yotzei lahareg, but when you take somebody out to be killed, ika chabura, he's still alive. And so as a result, even though we consider him like dead, but he's still alive enough to wound. Dechaihu, because he's alive. Ela de sofa lamus. The only point is that in the end he will die. So as a result, we have not successfully asked the question on Rav Sheshes, because Rav Sheshes would tell you that the brisa that talks about a son being prohibited to hitting and cursing his father is because even is when he's not the agent of the court. And you might have said, well, okay, if he's not the agent of the court, why is he allowed to hit his father and curse his father at all? Because he's being taken out as a convict. And so as a result, it's as if he's already dead. And yet we say you're still liable because you're not allowed to curse the father after he passes away, and you're not allowed to hit a father if you cause a wound after he passes away. But the only way you can do that is if he's alive now, and it's sofa lamud. But when it comes to a third party, there's no problem, because the only prohibition for cursing and for hitting is for somebody who is amucha, where we're talking about somebody who's among your people, meaning he acts in a proper manner, so he's not a sinner, and he is and he's alive, and he's somebody who is mekuyim, whereas this person is not. And so we're dealing with somebody who was sentenced to death, but did do tshuva, and yet we're going to say that the third party is still allowed to curse and hit the person, whereas the son is not. Okay, but at the end of the day, my havila Allah. What do we say about this in the end of the day? How do we resolve this question? So, Amar Rabba bar Rav Huna, v'chein Tana debei Rabbi Yishmael. So Rabba, the son of Rav Huna, said, and it was taught in the yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael, lakol that when it comes to any sin, a son should not serve as the agent of the court to hit the father or to curse the father. The one exception is with respect to somebody who encourages other people to engage in idolatry. That in that situation, the Torah specifically says, this is in Dvarim Parak Yud Gimel Pasuk Tet, that you should not be compassionate, nor shall you conceal the person. So as a result, we're going to say that in that situation, a son would be allowed to serve as the agent of the court to punish the parent. Okay, so now our opening Mishnah listed the sins for which one is subject to strangulation, the first of which was hitting a parent, and we've been talking about sort of what the sources are for that. And the limitations are for that. But now the Mishnah tells us some additional details, including the detail that we were just talking about. You're only going to be liable if you cause a wound. And this is a way in which cursing is more strict than hitting. Because if you curse somebody after the parent dies, if you curse your parent after your parent dies, you're going to be liable. But if one were to hit one's parent after the parent died, so patur, you'd be exempt, because again, you didn't cause a chabura. So now, so now the Gemara wonders, so having taught that, the Gemara now quotes a brisa that details some additional rules associated with hitting and cursing. So Tan Rabbanan, aviv imo kilel, so la'achar misa. So we're going to now prove the fact that when it comes to cursing after a parent dies, you're going to be liable. So the pasuk says that let's do the entire pasuk so that we can get the context, right? Ki ish asher yikalel es aviv es imo mos yumas aviv imo kilel damavo. So if a person, anyone who curses his father or his mother, he shall certainly be put to death. His father and his mother he has cursed, his blood is on him. So the point is what this whole phrase at the end, the whole end of that verse, Aviv imo kilel, the language that we're citing right now, wasn't necessary. We already know from the first half of the verse that the person has cursed their parent. So what is that coming to teach you? La'achar misa. It comes to teach us back into the Gemara. It's teaching us that after death, you're going to be still liable. So we're in the first line after the Gemara indication in the Gemara. So sheyachol, because I might have thought the brisa continues hoel v'chaya b'maka v'chaya b'makalel, that just as one is liable for hitting a parent, one is liable for cursing a parent. V'uma makash eino chayav ela mechayim af hamakalel eino chayav ela b'chayim. And you would say that just as hitting a parent, you're not going to be liable unless the parent is alive. So too, cursing the parent would also apply only if the person is alive. V'od kal v'chomer. And indeed, you could argue that there's a kal v'chomer, that we should definitely say that cursing a parent only applies during the person's lifetime. Uma makesh asabo shelo ba'amcha kiva amcha. When it comes to cursing a parent, you're only going to be we don't treat cursing a parent who is be'amcha like cursing a parent who's not be'amcha, meaning that cursing a parent who's a sinner is not punished, while cursing a parent who's not a sinner is punished. But lo chayev bo la'achar misa, and yet we're not going to make the person liable after death. So mikalel, I'm sorry. I said cursing, but I meant hitting. Umamikal, back a line. Umamikalel. Sorry, excuse me. I read it again wrong. Umamakesh asabo shaloba kiva amcha. When it comes to hitting, we don't make a distinction whether somebody is a sinner or not. Lo chayev bo la'achar misa. And yet, despite the breadth of the prohibition of hitting, because it applies both to sinners and to non-sinners, and yet we say you're not liable for hitting somebody after death. Mikala, when it comes to cursing, shaloa sabo, shaloba amcha kiva amcha. We distinguish, we don't equate somebody who's a sinner to somebody who's not a sinner. And we say that cursing a sinner is not liable, whereas cursing a non-sinner is liable. So, eino din shelo chayev bo la'achar misa. Well, then certainly when you don't have such a broad prohibition with respect to people who are alive, certainly when you go to after the death, you should not have a broad prohibition. So there are lots of reasons to think that cursing a parent after the parent dies should not be liable. So Talmud Lomar Aviv imo kilel. That's why we need these extra words, because that tells us la'achar misa, to tell us that you are liable for death, for cursing a parent even after the parent dies. So, Hanichel Rabbi Yonatan, that works. This whole lesson that this brisa taught works according to Rabbi Yonatan, because Rabbi Yonatan says, Demiyater lekra aviv v'imo. He has no other need for the words aviv v'imo kilel at the end of the pasuk, and so as a result, he can use them to tell us that it means that that you're liable for cursing a parent after the parent dies. But Rabbi Yoshia, but Rabbi Yoshia does have another reason, another usage for those words, as we are about to see. What is he going to say? Because listen to the brisa that gives us the opinions of both Rabbi Yonatan and Rabbi Yoshia. The first opinion of this brisa is Rabbi Yoshia, so even though it's going to only give his name at the end of his opinion, Tanya, we have the following brisa. Ish, the same pasuk that we're talking about begins with a man, which refers to any person. So Mal Talmud Lomer ish. What does the repetition tell us? L'rabos bas tumtum v'androgynous. It tells us that a daughter, a tumtum, and an androgynous, meaning a non-male, will also be subject to the death penalty if they curse their parents. Asher yikalel es aviv isimo. What do we learn from that? Ein li'ela aviv v'imo. I might have thought that this meant you have to curse both your father and your mother. Aviv v'shelo imo shelo aviv minayin. How do I know that cursing just one parent also triggers the death penalty? Talmud Lomar aviv v'imo kilel. That at the end of the pasuk it says the father and the mother you cursed. Aviv kilel imo kilel. Both the aviv is next to the word cursing at the beginning of the pasuk, and imo kilel, and the mother is next to the word kilel at the end of the pasuk. So either of them is going to be sufficient. Divrei Rebbe Yoshia. So that's Rebbe Yoshia. So the point is Rebbe Yoshia has used the words aviv imo kilel to tell us that a father or mother can be cursed. So he can't use those same words to teach us la'achar misa, that cursing after death also creates a problem. And is subject to the death penalty. So what about Rabbi Yonatan? What was he say? That's the second part of the brisa, which we don't need for our question, but let's learn it anyway. So Rabbi Yonatan Omer mashma shneim ke'echad. No, when you have two things that are said together, umashma echad be'echad bifnei atzmo. When you have A and B, it means both, or it means either one. It means ad yifaret l'cha kasav yachtav. Unless the Torah specifically says the word yachtav, meaning together, when you say A and B, it means A and B, and it means A or B, meaning that either one is going to be sufficient. So as a result, he has no need for this lesson of aviv imo kilel that Rebbe Yoshia uses at the end of the pasuk. And so as a result, he leaves that aviv imo kilel free to teach us that it can be used to teach us la'achar misa. So minala. So how does so first of all, how does So first of all, let's go to the question that we asked. How does Rabbi Yoshia know that cursing a parent after a parent passes away, you're still going to be liable? So nafgalei mi umikalel aviv imo mosumas. Well, we have another pasuk. The pasuk that we've been talking about is a pasuk in Vayikra. But the pasuk is Vayikra Parakaf pasuk tet. But now the pasuk that we're about to cite is a pasuk in Shmot, Parakaf Aleph, pasuk Yud Zayin, from Parshas Mishpatim. Nafgalei mi umekalel aviv imo mos yumas. That we learn from that repetition, from that not only if you curse your father and mother are you going to be put to death while they're alive, but also even after they die. Well, what does Rabbi Yonatan do with that pasuk? He doesn't need it to tell us about cursing a parent after death. Hahumi baile l'rabos bas tumtum v'androgonus. He needs it to tell us that anyone who curses, because listen, the key difference between this verse and the verse in Vayikra is that the verse in Vayikra began ish ish, but this verse doesn't reference anybody. That we quoted the entire verse. The entire verse is u'mekal aviv imo mosimas. It doesn't specify who the third party is that is doing the cursing, whether it's a daughter, a son, a tumtum, or androgynous. So as a result, that's how he would learn that all of them are covered. Well, why doesn't he learn? Why doesn't Rabbi Yonatan learn from the repetition of ish ish? So that he doesn't want to learn from, because Dibra Torah kilshon b'nei adam. That's the way people speak. And when the Torah uses a turn of phraseology, even if there's a repetition in that turn of phraseology, but it's a turn of phraseology that people use, and people say ish ish to mean anyone. So as a result, that's not going to be a repetition from which we are going to derive anything special. Okay, so as a result, now we have detailed that explain this brisa, but now we are going to note that our Mishnah noted how cursing a parent is more stringent than hitting. So the Gemara asks, why didn't the Mishnah mention a stringency in the other direction? So let's take a look. Why didn't our Mishnah teach a stringency about hitting that is greater than cursing? Because we have the rule that when it comes to cursing, you're only going to be liable if you curse somebody who is not a sinner. But if you curse a sinner, you're not going to be liable. But when it comes to hitting, we say it doesn't make a difference whether the person is a sinner or not a sinner. You're going to be liable. Masha Ein came b'mekalel, which is not true with respect to cursing, where one is not liable for cursing a parent who's a sinner. So kasavar makshinan hakal leklala. No, our Mishnah compares the hitting to cursing. So now we have in our Mishnah, we have the opinion that says that cursing and hitting are alike, and that just as when it comes to cursing, you're allowed to curse a parent that is a sinner, so too when it comes to hitting, you're allowed to hit a parent who's a sinner. So lema hani tanai. So now we have two different viewpoints because our Mishnah says that hitting and cursing are the same in that both of them, if you do to a sinner, you're going to be exempt. But when we just quoted this brisa, the brisa that we began our discussion of this Gemara with, we specifically distinguished between, because we had a Kal V'chomer, and the Kal V'chomer that we quoted was that when it comes to hitting, we're not distinguishing between a sinner and a non-sinner, whereas when it comes to cursing, we are distinguishing. And we use that as a basis to say that, hey, that's a reason that cursing should be more restrictive than hitting, and not less restrictive. And yet we said in the end that aviva imo kilel, the extra words in the pasuk, allow us to now say that cursing is going to be more is more broad, and actually applies even after the death. So we see in this brisa that the author of that brisa does distinguish between hitting and cursing. Hitting, you're liable no matter what, and cursing, you're only liable if you curse it a non-sinner. Whereas in our Mishnah specifically didn't mention how hitting can be stricter than cursing, because the author of our Mishnah doesn't think that hitting is stricter than cursing. He thinks that hitting and cursing are both the same, and you're not going to be punished for hitting or cursing a sinning parent. So lema hani tanai kahani tanai. Can we say that the two views of whether or not one hits a parent who's a sinner is match up with the following tanaim in the following brisa, following two brisa? So the first brisa is the Tani Chada. We have one brisa that says kuti, a kuti. Now a kuti is a group that converted to Judaism, but effectively left Judaism. And the question about them is, were they full-fledged converts so that we should treat them as Jews who are sinners, or were they not real converts in the first place because they converted just because of threats to them? And so as a result, we're not going to treat them as full-fledged Jews, and therefore they should be treated as non-Jews. So we're going to have two brises about kutim. Brisa number one, kuti atam mitzuva al haka'ato v'i atam mitzuva al kilulato. You are commanded not to hit him, and you are not commanded not to curse him. So this brisa seems to clearly align with the brisa that we cited at the beginning, because this brisa would say that this Jew is a sinner Jew, and you're not allowed to hit even a sinner Jew, but you are allowed to curse a sinner Jew. So that aligns with the brisa, which had the Kal V'chomer in it. V'tanya idach, and we have another brisa, Iyata mitzuva lo al kilato v'lo al hakato. And another brisa says you're not commanded, you're not prohibited, neither to curse nor to hit. Well, that's just like our Mishnah, which aligned hitting and cursing and said that the same law applies to both of them. So svarua dekuli alma kutim geri emetain, and both of these brises are saying that the kutim were full-fledged converts, and therefore they should be treated like Jewish sinners. So my lav bahab kamiflgi, and so isn't it this same dispute that everybody's arguing about Demar Sabar Makshin and Hakalik Lala, that the second opinion, the second brisa that we just cited, compares striking and cursing, and that's like our Mishnah, Umar Savar Lo Makshin and Hakalik Lala, and the first brisa is does not connect hitting and cursing, and that's why hitting is going to be prohibited even when it comes to a Jewish sinner like a kuti. And that's just like the brisa that we cited at the beginning of our Gemara. Lo, not necessarily. Dekule alma lo makshin and hakala klala. Maybe everybody says we don't compare hitting to cursing. And this is what they are arguing about. Mar savar kutim Geri emes hein, umar savar kutim geri arayos hein. And what they're arguing about is actually whether kutim are full-fledged converts and valid converts. That would be the opinion, and that would be why you're not allowed to hit them. And umar savar kutim geri harayosein, and the other one says no, they were kutim, they that are they were never real converts. They were always converts that converted only because lions were threatening them, and as a result their conversion is not a valid conversion, so they're not really Jewish, and that's why there's no prohibition to hit them. Well, 1 second, ihachi de katani Allah. But 1 second, we say about that brisa where it says that there's no prohibition to hit or to curse. We say Vishoro ki Yisrael, that his ox is considered like the ox of a Jew. So clearly, the kuti must, on some level, be considered Jewish. So Ella Shmamina Bakeshan Pligi Shmamina. So actually, we learned that in fact they are arguing about the same thing, and that both these two brisas and our Mishnah and the brisa that we cited at the beginning reflect a machlokas as to whether or not we connect cursing and hitting. Do we say that just as cursing is limited to non-sinners, so too hitting is limited to non-sinners? Or do we say, no, cursing is limited to non-sinners, but hitting covers everyone? Okay, so that concludes our discussion of hitting, as we now go to the second commandment that was mentioned in our Mishnah. So, my apologies for not scrolling. So the second crime mentioned in our Mishnah was kidnapping. So now the Mishnah turns to that. Hagonev nefesh miYisrael. If you kidnap a Jew, eino chayev ad nesenu l'rishuso. You're only going to be liable. You're not going to be liable until you take the person you kidnapped into your possession. Meaning you have to actually take some kind of control over the person. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda says you have to do more than that. You have to actually do some kind of usage of him. You have to use him and sell him. So we're going, okay. Hagonev esbeno. What about if you kidnap one's son? Rabbi Shmuel, beno shel Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka mechayev. Rabbi Shmuel says that you're chayev. Rabbi Chachamim potrin, whereas the Chachamim say no, you're going to be exempt. Second. Yeah. Okay. And Ganav Misha Chatzio Eved V'Chatzio Ben Choreh. What about if you were to kidnap somebody who was a half slave, half free? So Rabbi Yehuda Mechayev v'Chachamim potrin. Again, the Rabbi Yehuda says you're liable, and the Chachamim say you're not. So now the question is, did Rabbi Yehuda actually argue on the Tanna Kama, or was he adding a point with which the Tanna Kama would agree? So the Gemara is now going to clarify. The Tanna Kama lo by imor, does it really, could the Tanna Kama not require usage? The pasuk itself says that it requires usage. So Amar Rabbi Acha Brei de Rava imor pachos mishava pruta ika benaihu. What the difference is that is when the usage has value less than a shava pruta. So if it's valued at less than a shava pruta, the Tanna Kama would say you're still chayiv because that's still a usage. But Rabbi Yehuda says that you specifically have to use the person. That means that you need to have some kind of real value in order to have that be a usage. So now on that, now we have the Gemara addresses two special circumstances. So by Rabbi Yirmiyah, Gnavo umcharo yashen mahu. If you kidnap and sell somebody who's sleeping, what's the law? Meaning, is the sale of that person, did you need to, is that somehow a usage? Machar isha v'ubra mahu. If you just, if you took a woman and sold her for the baby that she was carrying, what's the law? Yesh derech imor b'kach, is that a manner of usage? Oh, ein derech imor b'kach, or is that not a manner of usage? V'teipaklei, 1 second, deleka imor klal. 1 second, shouldn't this be easily decided because there was no real usage at all? So as a result, we're going to revise the question. And what are we talking about? Lo, tzricha yashen de guzaga alei. No, we're dealing with somebody who was asleep and you leaned on the person. Or isha de okma ba'apizika. Or you took a pregnant woman and you put her in front of you so that to protect you from the wind. So is that derech imur b'kach? Is that the kind of usage? Oh, ein derech imur b'kach. Or is that not the proper usage? So what's the halacha? And the answer is teku. We don't actually have the answer. We'll have to wait for Mashiach to have the answer to that question. And so this brings us to a brisa that details who can be liable for kidnapping and who can be a victim. But for that discussion, please stay tuned for tomorrow's daf. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.